In the early years, there was a royal coffin shop in Dashi Town, Guangdong. It has been run for generations and is a time-honored brand. It is said that the Wang family has an ancestral treasure, which is a broom. It looks ordinary but has a terrifying magic. If the coffins in the shop cannot be sold, just use the broom to knock on the coffin in the middle of the night. After a knock, the next day, the coffin will definitely be sold. But the Wang family has an ancestral precept that treasures cannot be used casually. Usually they knock once a year and twice in leap years. Sister Wang always remembers the ancestral precepts and never knocks on the coffin casually. Therefore, although Sister Wang's coffin department did not make a fortune, it was quite prosperous and had no worries about food and drink. This year, the old shopkeeper fell seriously ill and had to give up the position of shopkeeper to his son Wang Ju. At the same time, he also handed over the magical broom. He repeatedly told Wang Ju to remember the ancestral precepts. This is unacceptable. Although Wang Ju agreed to his father on the surface, he was thinking in his heart, sell more if possible, don't sell more. Who has a grudge against money? At midnight that day, Wang Ju secretly got up from the bed and sneaked into the coffin shop. He wanted to try whether this treasure was effective. Wang Ju walked into the shop and saw 3 vermilion coffins lined up there. He raised the broom and aimed at the first coffin and knocked several times. Then he went back home to sleep with suspicion. Sure enough, when it was still dawn, there was a sudden knock on the door. Wang Ju had just opened the door when several people filed in. They said someone died last night and they were in a hurry to use the coffin. Business came in. Wang Ju was overjoyed and led those people to the coffin shop. He didn't choose the people. After paying the money, he lifted the coffin at the edge and hurried away. Wang Ju held the money and was shocked. He was sweating coldly. The coffin that was sold was the one that he had knocked with the broomstick last night. He stood there in a daze, thinking to himself, this treasure is really effective. If that's the case, wouldn't I be rich? He laughed at his predecessors, why they only knocked once in normal years and twice in leap years. Isn't that a golden rice bowl but a poor life? After finally getting to midnight, Wang Ju knocked on another coffin with the broomstick. At dawn, the coffin was sold and carried away. Wang Ju was so happy at this time. He immediately hired carpenters and increased the staff. Overnight, the coffin shop expanded in scale. Coffins were made one after another. Because he had the treasure, he knocked on it every night, so not a single coffin was left. Over time, relatives, friends, and neighbors knew the secret and gritted their teeth. I hate him with all my heart, but I can't do anything about it. I can only live in fear. I'm afraid that if Wang Ju knocks on the coffin, it will be my turn next. So a jingle spread. I'm not afraid of natural disasters, but I'm afraid that Wang Ju will knock on the coffin. Wang Ju's coffin shop's business is getting more and more popular, and the money is rolling in. Later, Wang Ju's father found out about this. He lay on the bed and said not to knock anymore because if he knocks again, he will be struck by lightning. But Wang Ju has already fallen into the money, so he doesn't listen to the old man. In the middle of the night, the Wang family's coffin shop still often hears the sound of knocking on coffins, which makes people shudder. This day, Wang Ju forced the guys to work overtime and made 4 coffins in a row. In the evening, he went into the coffin shop early with a broom, intending to knock on each one and sell them all tomorrow. That would be a lot of silver. Coffin shop. It was dark and gloomy inside. Blind Ju groped in the dark. He found the first coffin. He pouted his head. At this moment, he suddenly heard someone behind him yelling, "You little bastard! You knocked again! You're going to piss me off to death." Wang Ju was startled. He looked back. He saw his father standing in the dark with a cane. Wang Ju was very angry. He thought, I'm the shopkeeper now. You should enjoy your retirement and live a leisurely life. Why do you care so much? So he ignored his father's dissuasion and raised the broomstick again. He didn't expect his father to rush over regardless of everything and knock him into a hunting arrow. The broomstick in his hand just landed on the lid of the coffin. Old Chen's head also hit the front wall of the coffin. With a bang, the old man fell down. Wang Ju didn't knock on the remaining 3 coffins again. He hurriedly carried his father into the house. When he saw that his father's brain had exploded and he had already died, he was filled with remorse and grief. After all, he was his father. He hugged the old man's body and cried bitterly. Later, he buried his father in the coffin. With music and drums, Wang Ling was sent to the west. Everyone saw it clearly and thought clearly. Wang felt that his father was knocked to death by his son. This was retribution. Everyone thought that Wang Ju would turn back from his wrong path. At first, Wang Ju seemed to have come to his senses and stopped knocking on the coffin. It was strange to say that if he stopped knocking, the coffins in the shop would really not be sold. Seeing that the coffins were not turning into silver, Wang Ju was so anxious that he could no longer bear it. He forgot all the words of his ancestors. That night he sneaked into the coffin shop again, raised the sweeping song and knocked on a coffin. Bang! After knocking once before the sound had died down, voices could be heard from the coffin. What are you knocking for? It has an owner. Wang Ju was so scared that he dared not knock anymore. He hurried home and hid in bed. He dared not move. In a daze he had many nightmares. The next morning, Wang Ju poked his head out of the bed and looked out the window. It had snowed heavily last night. Wang Ju left the house and came to the gate of the courtyard and pushed open the door. At this time, Wang Ju suddenly found that there was a person lying in the snow at the door. He was covered with thick snow. Ripples and green parts of his body were stiff. Wang Ju thought to himself, when he knocked on the coffin last night, the coffin said it had an owner. Could it be that this dead person was talking about? What a wishful thinking. A coffin cost dozens of taels of silver. How could he give it to an unknown ghost for nothing? He immediately found a rake. Moved the dead man onto the top, pull up the chestnut rake and head into the mountains. It was a road after the snow. Wang Ju used all his strength to pull Perry to the foot of the hillside of Dahe Ridge. Looking at the wilderness around him, he lowered his head and said to the dead man on the Perry, "Hey, this is a good place. You can sleep here." He was about to reach out to pull the dead man, but the man woke up like a thread and actually spoke, "Don't leave me here. Save my life. I will give you money." Wang Ju was shocked. He reached out to check the man's nose and found that he was still breathing. When he heard the man say he would give money, his eyes lit up and blurted out, "How much do you want to give?" "As long as you save me, I will give you as much as you want." Wang Ju was very happy. He thought to himself, "I have met the god of wealth today." He pulled up the Perry and ran back. As he pulled, Wang Ju slowed down his pace and went back. He turned around and looked at the man carefully. He was dressed well. But how much money could he have on him? I had to find out. I couldn't get up early without energy. So the prince asked, "How much money do you have on you?" The man said weakly, "I don't have any money. If you save me, I will send you the money." Upon hearing this, the prince understood everything. It turned out that the man was deceiving him. After saving him, what can I do with him if he has no money? Besides, he is in such a state that he will probably not survive. If he dies in his own home, he may have to be buried in a coffin. I can't do such a stupid thing. Thinking of this, the prince turned around and walked back. The man who climbed on the hat said anxiously, "What are you going to do?" "I will give you money." The prince never listened to the man's nonsense again. No matter what he said, begging without looking back, he pulled Polly down the hillside. With a strong push, the man fell into the snow pit with a plop. He didn't know if he caught a cold when pulling Polly up the mountain or what. After Wang Ju returned home, he fell seriously ill. He didn't eat or drink for several days. His body was as weak as a ball of cotton. He really didn't have the strength to knock on the coffins in the middle of the night. The coffins there were never sold. After Wang Ju drank bowl after bowl of bitter medicine soup, his illness got better. One day, Wang Ju walked into the coffin shop and walked around the talking coffin. He wondered why it could talk. Was there someone inside? He asked someone to open the lid of the coffin and saw nothing inside. At first, Blind Ju was very scared. He always felt that the coffin talking was a bad sign. But day after day, nothing happened. His heart gradually settled down. He consoled himself by saying that maybe he heard it wrong or maybe it was an illusion. How could a coffin talk? He was just scaring himself. In the middle of the night, Wang Ju got up again. He wanted to knock on all the coffins. But before he could leave the house, he saw torches burning outside. The doors and windows of a man called Ma Si were smashed. Oh no, bandits are coming. Wang Ju wanted to hide with the money box, but he calmed down immediately because he remembered that bandits have rules. They don't rob coffin shops. They must have made a mistake, so he walked out swaggeringly and said loudly that I run a coffin shop. You made a mistake. But before he could finish his words, he was put into a sack. The next day, everyone in the town knew that bandits had robbed Wang Jie's coffin shop last night. No one understood why the bandits would break their own rules this time and rob the coffin shop. But when everyone arrived at the coffin shop, they found out that the money in the shop was not robbed, but a coffin was lost. Besides that, the prince was missing. Not long after, someone found the coffin in the snow under the Dahe Ridge. There was a big stone on it. After removing the stone and opening the coffin, they saw a dead person inside. There was no scar on his body. He was frozen to death. It was none other than the prince. From then on, the royal coffin shop fell into decline. Later, it gradually disappeared from the land of Kanto. The whereabouts of the magical broomstick were also lost. Later, a former bandit told a secret. It turned out that the person who fell at the gate of the prince was a bandit leader. That night he went alone to shoot, that is, to conduct reconnaissance. Unexpectedly, he fell seriously ill halfway through the journey and fainted in front of Wang Jie's coffin shop. After being thrown into the mountains by Wang Ju, he was revived by a woodcutter. The bandit leader hated Wang Ju so much that he took revenge. Well, today's story is over. Thank you for listening. At the end of the program, I want to tell you a true horror story. It was also shared with me by a listener in our family. It happened to my father. We are from the south. When I was in the 5th grade, my father went out with the villagers to raise bees. In the first year, my father went out to raise bees. During the summer vacation of 10 bees, I went to my father's bee farm to play. It happened that my father moved the bee farm, so I followed them to Hunan. At that time, it was our first time to go to the countryside in Hunan. It was not knowing the local customs, we found a clean-looking cement ground to build a house because there was mud everywhere. There was also a cornfield and a few small dirt piles on the side. We didn't pay much attention to it at the time and thought that the dirt piles were sand and soil for building houses. So we took off the wind. At night, our family was tired after running around all day, so we went to bed early. It was too hot and the cement ground was steaming. We couldn't sleep because of the heat. My dad took out the steel bed and slept outside the beehive. Because there were so many mosquitoes, my dad lit the mosquito smoke spray bottle and sprayed smoke all around to prevent mosquitoes from getting close. That's it. My dad slept outside the beehive and we slept inside. The next day, I saw that my mother's face looked a little unhappy. That's right. It was already noon. My dad was still sleeping in bed. This was a bit unreasonable. At night, I was squatting outside the beehive, mumbling something. I only knew that my dog kept barking and making noises that night, but my mom still didn't tell me anything. After a few days, my dad moved the bee farm. My mom told me that my dad had run into something unclean that night. She was afraid that I would be scared, so she didn't tell me. That day, my dad set up a bed outside the beehive and used a mugwort smoker to spray smoke all around. As soon as he lay down, suddenly a disheveled person covered my dad's head with his hair. My dad suddenly felt that he couldn't move his whole body. He opened his eyes and saw that this was not a person. A face with empty eyebrows and eyes appeared in front of him. My dad was so scared that he wanted to run away. I tightened my bedding, but I had no strength left in my body. Fortunately, my father, who was young and strong, shouted loudly and sat up. He looked around, but there was nothing. My father immediately packed his bedding and wanted to go into the beehive. But our dog kept barking at my father and would not let him in. So my father sat at the door all night until the roosters crowed a few times. Then he went back to the beehive to sleep. Later, I asked the villagers and found out that the place where we put the beehive was where the bodies of the locals were kept after death. The piles of earth on the side were not piles of sand and earth prepared for building houses, but subcontracts. The dog would not let my father in. It was probably because the dog could see that there was something dirty on my father, so he was not allowed to enter. Later, before unloading the bee farm from MOBA, they would ask the local people for details before unloading.